Now,
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
I just want the record to reflect, because I just revealed earlier in the program, Julie Gunlock, we were talking about how we love cooking for our families.
Yeah.
You could, I mean, you'd be forgiven if you referred to me and Julie as chefs of sorts, right? Personal chefs.
I'm a home cook. I'm a good home cook.
No, we are like personal chefs for our loved ones and our family. And I just want everyone to know that if strangely you learn years from now that she and I drown under mysterious circumstances,
Larry,
as personal chefs to our family members, there is absolutely nothing there to look at. There's nothing.
You know what I made last night?
What you
I
got?
told you what I made last night for the kids. I made a fish pie, and they all wanted to drown me. So
Well, yeah, fish pie is that's a hard sell sometimes. Where's my chicken? All right, coming up later in the program here as we plow through a very busy morning. It's 7:35, Jennie Taer of Daily Caller News Foundation on the border crisis. 8:05, John Solomon on the Biden story. And at 8:35, Mark Mix, president of National Right to Work. Julie Gunlock, personal chef, who is, you're a fairly good swimmer, right?
I am.
I am too. Again, any stories of us drowning in 8 feet of water, if we have any connection to any former president, merely coincidental.
That's right. There we go.
Glad we cleared that up. Joining us right now is Thomas Baker. Tom is a former FBI special agent, and he's author of The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Wow, Tom. Thanks for joining us. Always love talking with you. It's been a while. Thanks for being on.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
You love the FBI. You spent 33 years in the FBI. You, if I remember right, you were the head of the counterintelligence arm of the FBI, weren't you? What, the same agent, the same part of the agency that Peter Strzok was in charge of? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I wasn't. I was in the Washington field office for a long time, and I'm familiar with these matters. And of course, I wrote the book about it.
Okay, thank you. That's when I say correct me if I'm wrong. I truly do want to be corrected. But that said, obviously you have a great affection for the FBI, and here you are saying that the FBI is a threat to democracy. Is there anything more that you have learned over the course of the last several weeks that reinforced that opinion?
Everything. It is a threat to democracy, and what's a threat to democracy? It's a threat to the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, particularly the activities that have been exposed, suppressing free speech, and things of that nature. And that's what I'm most concerned about. But aside from the fact that it's a threat to our liberties, for me personally, it's heartbreaking. As you said, and you put it right, and I want that to be known. I love the FBI. I've always loved the FBI. And what I want to see them do now is change their culture and get back on track.
Can I ask you real fast on this? Because there's a lot of people running for elected office, specifically for president, who have various approaches to this. Some say the FBI should be eliminated and remade. Some say that it just requires getting rid of the top leadership, the political appointees. Some say, a full audit and overall. From your opinion, being in the belly of the beast there, what do you think? How do you fix the FBI?
Okay, two things. One, the culture of the FBI has to be changed back to a swear to tell the truth law enforcement agency, and to get away from this freewheeling intelligence approach that began under Bob Mueller and then was exacerbated by the poor leadership of James Comey. So it has to be done internally. The culture has to be changed. There is a role for Congress on certain angles of it, looking at maybe changing or reforming the FISA Act and things of that nature. But basically, it's the thing the FBI has to do itself. They have to recognize they have a problem. It's not just a matter of a few bad eggs, a few bad apples. Every time something happens, 1, 2, or 3 people are either fired or allowed to quit. No, there's an underlying cultural problem.
As a parent, I'm pro law enforcement and have always, really appreciated what the FBI does. But after the COVID shutdown of schools and the fact that the Department of Justice saw parents as enemies and somehow terrorists, and, certainly the FBI's behavior towards that pro-life dad, Mark Houck, doing an early morning raid, guns ablazing on his home. I don't feel comfortable anymore. And I think the FBI, it's not their job to have a big PR rollout to have a good impression with the American public, but do they understand? Does the FBI understand how they've lost the trust of many Americans, not just pro-lifers and parents and, I don't know, Catholic men, but many people see them as almost scary. And that's a horrible thing to say, but many Americans do view the FBI as not on their side.
Julie, you put your finger right on something. There's an attitude that the public, the American people, are the enemy somehow, and somehow have to be dealt with. When in the past, the FBI saw themselves as serving the American people. When we were in new agents training, the Constitution was something we got in the classroom all the time, particularly the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. And we were told specifically that we should not view the Fourth, the Fifth, and Sixth Amendments as obstacles to be overcome, but we should embrace them. And it was a whole different approach. And I think, but that doesn't exist with the intelligence mindset today of wielding, find out who should be investigated. That has to be restored. The Constitution, the primacy of the Constitution as a guardrail of the FBI's business.
It sounds to me, we're speaking with Tom Baker. He's a 33-year veteran at the FBI, and his book is The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. It sounds like you're saying, if I can summarize it, that the FBI used to be a bunch of cops, and now they think of themselves as a bunch of spies.
Exactly. And that, and you simplified it, but that was it. That culture led to a certain mentality, a certain mindset. And that's what we have to get back to. We have to recognize the problem and correct it.
Okay, but you mentioned specifically the Mueller era, and his era came right after 9/11 and after the global war on terror, in which the FBI was sort of charged with protecting the homeland. A huge part of their intelligence capabilities was specifically to share information with other intelligence agencies so we could prevent the next terror attack. The FBI would say to you, Tom, that, easy for you to say, old timer, you were back in an era where it was just about, finding crooks and thieves and bank robbers. If we give up our intelligence capability, then thousands of Americans will die in the next terror attack. How do you respond to that?
Well, Larry, you put your finger right on it. A lot of this started in a reaction to September 11th, which was a crisis. And we all know now in history, or those of us who read history, that whenever there's a crisis, a lot of changes take place, and some of them have unintended consequences. A lot of these things were done to address the threat of international Islamic terrorism, but they opened the door to a whole different way of doing business, and it was a mindset. The FBI always had a counterintelligence mission, but they went about it operating as law enforcement within the guidelines of the Constitution. Mueller set about to change that, and he did change that, and it had unintended consequences, and many of them bore bad fruit. We saw it in the Russian collusion investigation, certainly, and in numerous incidents since then. In an FBI that operated strictly within the guidelines of the Constitution, you'd never have people coming up with proposals to investigate Catholics who prefer to use Latin in their worship. That's something you wouldn't touch. You wouldn't touch anything that infringed or impinged on the First Amendment Constitution.
And it seems, Tom, we got to end it here, but it seems like every time they do get caught, they always rationalize it with, well, there were some missteps, but we still need these tools to protect America, and so you'll never get rid of those tools. Otherwise, you're against the idea of protecting our country, and that's an insidious little whirlpool to get caught up in. I can't wait to read your book. It's called The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Don't be a stranger. I have a feeling as we get into this next election and as there are very real tangible moves to reform the FBI, you're going to be a very valuable voice, Tom Baker.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
It is 7:15 now.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, is our women's soccer team at the World Cup a bunch of unpatriotic louts that should be boycotted? 9 a.m. on WMAL.
Julie Gunlock, fair jumping has been a controversial issue here in Washington, D.C. It didn't used to be controversial. Here's the thing. You want to ride Metro, then you buy your Metro card, you pay your fare, you use your card to go through the turnstile, and everything's fine. And if you do anything other than that, if you jump over the turnstile without paying your fare, then you get ticketed. And if you're habitual, when you're arrested, and if you've got a criminal record, then you're going to jail.
Larry.
I know.
None of this happens.
Well, we were taught, I should say, about 5 years ago, that in fact giving somebody a ticket or even arresting them for jumping their fare on Metro is in fact racist.
Racist.
You can't do that. Of course, I find it racist to suggest that it's only black people who are engaged in this behavior.
Yeah.
But, who am I? I'm
Right.
certainly not a member of the district council. Former mayor and district council member Vincent Gray was a guest on my afternoon drive program when this law was first put together. I want you to listen to a little bit of our exchange back then. We're going to go in the Wayback Machine here. It's very exciting. How many people were being jailed on a first offense for jumping the fare?
Well, we had any number of arrests that occurred. We had in 2015 we had nearly 500. We had over 700 in 2016, and then in 2017 we had over 1,400 people who were arrested for this. So
right, but how many went to jail?
Number.
How many went to jail? Because I challenged you on this, and you said, well, we shouldn't have people going to jail for jumping a $2 fare. How many went to jail?
Well, I don't know the exact number that went to jail, but just the idea of being arrested for not paying a $2 fare, it just seems unfair to me.
Yeah, see, you notice that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't go to jail. I said, okay, well, how many went to jail? I said, well, there were a lot of arrests. Okay, how many went to jail?
Right.
But this is how it was sold to us. That was Vincent Gray back there in my exchange with him. And now, of course, we've learned the repercussion. What did we say? We said if you do this, number one, the revenue for Metro is going to tank because you're going to teach the world that, we don't really care if you pay for your fare or not, right?
Yep.
And number two, you're introducing a criminal element into Metro. You're basically saying criminals welcome here.
Yep.
We don't take the law seriously. And if you're the kind of criminal who will jump the fare on Metro, you're probably also the kind of criminal who might shoplift, or maybe you're the kind of criminal who will defecate on the Metro,
or maybe
vandalize.
Steal a car at a valet station.
Exactly. You start saying we're excusing this criminal behavior. Then at what point do you draw the line and say, okay, now we're going to start drawing? And guess what? Within just 5 short years, Metro has become unwritable, unlivable.
Yeah.
Yes, of course the revenue tanked because people weren't buying, but you've also got criminals. So now, what has Metro decided to do? Have they gone back to the district council? Have they said, you've got to enforce the law? You've got to change the law. You've got to allow cops to arrest people. This is untenable. This is a problem. Nope. Couldn't do that. Did Vincent Gray or other Treyon Martin, other members of the district council step up and say, we were wrong? This is an awful idea. There's nothing racist about enforcing the law. Let's get the law back on the books. Did they do that, Julie?
No.
They did not do that. What did they do? Because they do know there's a problem. So what have they done? They have spent millions of dollars to install new turnstiles.
Jeez.
There are new, and Metro is very proud of it. They're rolling it out. They put it out there on social media.
So essentially, you cannot hop.
Well, theoretically, the people will figure it out.
They will.
Okay. But right now, the turnstiles, if you go ride Metro now, which of course I know you won't because of all of the problems we've just detailed.
Right.
But if you ride Metro, they have now installed these tall plexiglass walls, basically.
It's like COVID all over again.
That's right. That's right. But of course, as soon as the turnstile opens, the wall opens too.
Yeah.
So one person could do it and then 4 people could run through or whatever. Or they're going to figure it out. They're criminals. If they put as much energy into actually getting a job and earning money the honest way, it would be amazing. But instead, they put all that energy and ingenuity into a way to jump around the wall at the Metro. But think about this for a minute. We were told that enforcing fare jumping laws was racist. And now it's become this huge disaster. And so their way to solve the problem and steer clear of being racist is to build a wall. I thought walls were racist. I thought walls were xenophobic. I thought
Look at that, Larry.
walls destroy communities.
Yeah.
We need to take down those walls. Now, not if it's...
Someone might be onto something. They might take this wall idea and move it to the southern border.
There you go. Good. Great on you, Metro. Fabulous. This is so obviously they're admitting that they were wrong.
Yep.
But they can't admit they're wrong.
Right.
So how do they admit they're wrong? Instead of actually saying, "Hey, we were wrong,"
They spend more money.
They spend more millions of dollars of your money to now prevent the thing from happening that they are allowing to happen by just not enforcing it and not letting cops do their job.
And money that's been diverted from other projects, by the way.
Yeah.
Because they're not making it on their own.
Well, luckily, Metro has tons of money just lying around to spend. There you go. It's 7:24. All right, coming up, we're going to check in on the border crisis while we're focused on all the Biden scandals. Let's not forget about that scandal where he's just neglected the security of our nation. What's happening down there? We'll talk to Jennie Taer next. Kicking butt on a Tuesday morning on O'Connor and Company. A reminder again, Julie and I are great swimmers. So if we're ever hired by any president or any other elected official to be their personal chefs, we just want you to know that there is no possible way that we would ever drown. Right?
Right.
Just
Got it.
Make sure. It's just something that I always like to remind people of, that
Makes
we will
sense.
not drown in waist-high water. 8:05, John Solomon is going to join us on the Biden scandals. And at 8:35, we've got the president of National Right to Work. That's Mark Mix, because we've got a looming UPS strike. I'm Larry O'Connor. That's Julie Gunlock, a fine swimmer and great chef. Julie.
Thank you.
Imagine what it would look like down at our southern border if it weren't as secure and closed and orderly and humane as the Biden administration has attested to for the last 3 years. It'd be really chaotic. Joining us right now is Jennie Taer. She's an investigative immigration reporter at Daily Caller News Foundation. She's investigating the reality of the border unlike any other reporter out there. Jennie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It must give you just like a twitchy response the second you hear those quotes played back, knowing what you've seen down there.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly how I feel. I feel like it's a gut punch to think that those are the public statements being made to Americans who, don't have the opportunity to see what I've seen in the last couple of years, which is chaos, which is a humanitarian disaster. People dying, people ill, people coming through in the extreme heat right now in tractor trailers. And then, of course, you have the law enforcement personnel, the suicides up in Border Patrol. You have the communities reeling from this crisis. And then, of course, you hear statements like that. And that's just not the reality.
Well, and by the way, you also have the phenomenon of when people do get across the border, then they become such a burden on the cities like El Paso, San Antonio, various border towns where they live on the streets, they become vagrants, and then the state of Texas has to deal with the actual economic impact here because the federal government is doing nothing. That's why Governor Abbott has done this sort of floating barricade, these basically sort of pontoons that cross the Rio Grande, that if you're swimming across the Rio Grande or trying to wade across the Rio Grande, you can't get across these floating. It's actually quite ingenious. And so now, of course, the Justice Department is trying to sue Texas. The Justice Department is really concerned about the border crisis. They're suing the state of Texas instead of actually doing something to enforce our laws, Jennie.
Yeah, so this is, yesterday we found out that the Justice Department decided to follow through with a lawsuit that they threatened over Texas Governor Greg Abbott over his floating buoy barrier in the Rio Grande, just a 1,000-foot barrier that he recently erected there, and, to stop the flow of illegal immigration into Texas. The Biden administration says that it's actually obstructing their federal authorities' ability to secure the border, and now they say that it's a violation of U.S. law and that it should be removed immediately, and that's what the judge should order. That's what they're arguing.
Jennie, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about this recent article you wrote about the Coast Guard reporting that they are picking up Chinese migrants increasingly trying to enter the U.S. by water. You wrote about this for the Daily Caller. Can you tell us about this? It's very scary stuff.
Yes, absolutely. We've seen a surge in Chinese migrants coming across the southern border, but authorities have also seen them on coastal waters trying to come through places like Florida, or Puerto Rico, which is also seeing a surge in illegal immigration. Of course, these migrants, when they're coming through, in this example, there were 6 recently caught by the Coast Guard. They were actually transferred back to the Bahamas. So coastal immigration law is a little different. They are often returned to Bahamas or other nearby areas where we do have agreements with law enforcement. Of course, that's not as simple at the southern border or even the northern border, where we've seen similar surges. Often Chinese migrants who cross the southern border are released into the public because we just don't have the capabilities or the agreements with the government of China to be able to return people. And so that's where you have this question of what are the motives of people coming all the way from China to the United States, paying, upwards of $30,000 to come, way more than someone from Latin America would pay, as well as, other issues of smuggling and what they're actually doing. And I've talked to people like Gordon Chang, a China expert, who says there's definitely reasons to believe that there could be people who want to commit acts of sabotage.
Yeah. Hey, Jenny, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, about the fentanyl issue down there. And Mexico's rolling it, China's rolling it, and our Biden administration's neglect of it. Also, you had a close encounter with Secretary Mayorkas the other day in D.C. I want to ask you about that, but I'm right up against a break. Can you stick with us for one more segment by any chance to explore this further?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. A little bit more with Jennie Taer of Daily Caller News Foundation. And yeah, she always seems to run into cabinet secretaries hanging around D.C., going to yoga, walking their dogs. We're going to show you that video in a moment.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Jennie Taer with the Daily Caller News Foundation. Just curious what you make of the border numbers being down right now. The illegal encounters are low, but you're bringing people through the ports of entry. Do you have an answer to that? Do you have any explanation? You're still bringing people through.
Jennie Taer of the Daily Caller News Foundation. They're going to start sending your picture out to all the cabinet secretaries. When last we saw you, Jenny, you were dressed up for your yoga class down near the Capitol, and you saw Pete Buttigieg. And remember, he took a picture of you and got all agitated. Yeah. How dare you ask me if I'm going to go visit East Palestine, Ohio? Of course, he did a week later because of Jennie Taer. Now this time, I'm looking at the picture of you. You're on crutches out on a walking path, and here comes Secretary Mayorkas. Of all the luck, Jenny.
I know. I'm fully vindicated because I was on crutches. I was going to support my coworkers who were playing softball, and here comes Secretary Mayorkas walking his dog. And we had just gotten the border numbers showing a historic number of migrants being brought through the ports of entry through CBP-1, a phone app that the Biden administration is now using to let them in that way. And, lo and behold, here's my moment.
He didn't seem to want to answer your questions, though. He seemed a little confused. Why is this young woman on crutches yelling at me about the border?
By the way, his dog is
I know.
very
Well, at least
cute.
he didn't take my picture like Pete Buttigieg.
That's right. Although I was recently briefed by Peter Schweitzer. He's been doing some great investigative work into China and the fentanyl crisis. And people have to understand, this is not just China sending these pills with drug couriers across the border. The materials come from China in a very orchestrated way. They go to Mexico, but then there are operatives who are working with China who are in Mexico who actually do the final process of making this fentanyl, and then that becomes part of the drug cartel's deadly business here in America. Crossing the border. Everybody knows it. The DEA knows it. The Border Patrol knows it. Homeland Security knows it. HHS knows it. But, Jenny, the Biden administration, they never want to talk about it, let alone actually do anything about it. And we act like China and Mexico are still our friends.
Oh, absolutely. And just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Biden administration is actually weighing a plan to lift some sanctions on China because China says that in order to work with us on counter-narcotics efforts when it comes to fentanyl, that you have to lift these sanctions against this public security institute we have, because right now with the current sanctions, we can't access the counter-narcotics equipment the U.S. has supplied us with. So right now we just don't have the cooperation with China, which is the root of this issue, like you just described.
So basically China's saying, hey, we'd love to work with you on this fentanyl thing if you'd only lift these sanctions. In other words, they're blackmailing you. Yeah. We're going to continue to send fentanyl to kill your children unless you lift the sanctions.
Yes, that's the case. And, now it's just everywhere. I actually spoke to a mother recently who lost her 3-year-old son due to exposure to fentanyl. So people who use fentanyl and leave it out, there are children now who are just touching it and having exposure through that, putting it in their mouth on accident, because children just, are being children and shouldn't have to worry about things like this. And then you have people overdosing at ages that just, so young, and not just people who are users or addicts, but people who use it one time or think it's something else, right?
Well, China's unwillingness to work with the United States and actually blackmailing the United States is not something that Mayorkas has to deal with. I mean, he has to deal with obviously the border and how it comes into this country, but that is something for Antony Blinken, who I'm sure is not. Has he? I'll just ask. Has he tackled this issue? The fact that China has behaved in this way, is this part of ongoing negotiation with China on other things, or is this something that the State Department doesn't touch?
Well, right. This is exactly in the State Department's area. And Blinken actually recently met with Chinese officials in Beijing, and this was part of the discussion, according to the Wall Street Journal. But that China hasn't agreed to anything, that's what they say. And then, of course, Blinken says they haven't agreed to lift any sanctions right now. But again, you have U.S. officials repeatedly saying, we actually had the Office of National Drug Control Policy at the White House recently say that China has not been cooperating and that it is a problem. And then you have officials in DHS saying that, and this was actually recent testimony by a DHS official, that China, as much as the U.S. even tries to regulate this with China and gets China to schedule fentanyl to be able to increase the penalties for it, the problem is that the producers of these chemicals in China, they constantly are changing the chemical makeup by little, molecules, essentially, so that it doesn't meet the requirements for regulation.
Wow.
And they're constantly moving ahead and skirting the law, even with what's in place in China or what's in place in the U.S. to regulate it.
And again, our government knows this. They see exactly what's happening, and they are acting as though they're powerless. Jennie Taer, the border and our lack of security on our southern border for multiple reasons is a giant story, yet only a handful of reporters are covering it. Jennie Taer is one of them at the Daily Caller News Foundation. It's always good to talk with you. Go find yourself another cabinet secretary, all right? They're all out there.
Thank you. On it.
It's 7:54. Coming up, our big 8 o'clock hour, we kick things off with John Solomon. Are we headed toward impeachment? John will know, and he'll tell us.